Welcome to your startup community, where we unpack the messy magic of building entrepreneurial ecosystems. I'm Chris Heivly, former SVP of Ecosystem Development at Techstars, author of Build the Fort, the Startup Community Builder's Field Guide, a longtime blogger and speaker about founders, startups, and startup communities, and your host. I've worked with hundreds of ecosystems enthusiasts across 20 plus countries and helped grow cities from meh to magnetic. In this podcast, we'll walk the talk. No hype, no fluff, just practical insights to help you and your startup community grow. So let's dive in. Hey folks, welcome back to the Your Startup Community podcast, the show where we unpack what makes entrepreneurial communities thrive and what happens sometimes when we get it wrong. Today, we're diving into an interesting question that comes up a lot in my conversations with founders, community builders, and city leaders. And that is there a difference between a startup community and an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Well, spoiler alert, yes. I think there is, as do my colleagues Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway. And the difference really matters depending on where your city or town is on its startup journey. We're going to get into definitions, who belongs in each, and when to focus on community versus ecosystem building, and what happens when you try ecosystem building without a mature startup community underfoot. And of course, we'll land this plane where we always do, on the backs of founders. Because at the end of the day, founders, they set the pace. So let's get into it. Let's review the basics from episode 1. A startup community is, at its core, a connected group of entrepreneurs and the people who support them: mentors, early stage investors, co-working space managers, meetup organizers, and others who've chosen to prioritize entrepreneurs' needs above all else. It's mostly made up of founders, former founders acting as mentors, and early supporters. Brad Feld's work and the Techstars approach often emphasize this idea that startup communities are founder-led, and the view has to be long-term and, of course, radically inclusive. You build a startup community by focusing on the people already taking entrepreneurial risks, not by writing plans, but by making coffee dates and opening up your network and telling stories that celebrate local success. As an entrepreneurial ecosystem, on the other hand, that's broader. It includes government agencies, universities, large corporations, real estate developers, workforce development programs, and of course, media. It's the entire support system around entrepreneurship, formal and informal. Think of it as a lot of the infrastructure that augments that local innovation. Now, let's use a metaphor to make this even more tangible. Russian nesting dolls. Have you ever seen those wooden dolls that when you take the top off, there's another smaller doll inside? And then you open up the top of that doll and there's another doll inside? Well, in our way of thinking, the community is the smallest doll, followed by the ecosystem. You may remember in the last episode that I ran through the types of actors that make up the community and the actors that are probably more members of the ecosystem. And this is kind of important, so let me review this again and break it down. In a startup community, your main actors are active and inspiring founders, former founders turned mentors, local investors with the right give first mindset, and community builders, the people who are organizing these events and programs and co-working spaces. However, in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, you're layering in people like government and economic development folks, universities and research institutions and their staff, corporate partners, maybe their executive and industry association staff, foundations and funders focused on impact, media and storytellers who amplify our wins and share our losses, and real estate and infrastructure players like lawyers and accountants who, of course, support the community. If it's not obvious yet, ecosystems are much more difficult to build and maintain as there are many more actors involved, each one bringing their own motivations. Ecosystems are more like rainforests. They're diverse, interdependent, and yes, a complex system that evolves over time. So you ask, so Chris, why should I not go straight to ecosystem building and save me and my peers a lot of time and just get there faster? Well, folks, it all comes down to simple human psychology. People, especially ecosystem actors like busy corporate executives or government leaders, need to feel that their engagement be impactful before they invest their time. When your startup community is still forming, there's little visible momentum, few wins to celebrate, and no obvious place for outsiders to plug in. So they hesitate. They stay on the sidelines, unsure of how they can help, or even helping even matters. But once the core community is strong, when founders are active, events are buzzing, stories are being told, suddenly it feels like there's a place and a role that these ecosystem actors can grab onto. And that's when ecosystem players lean in. They see how their involvement is meaningful. They recognize how their contributions, whether it's mentorship or funding or infrastructure, can move the needle. It's not just a good deed, it becomes a strategic move. Speaking of strategy, power brokers, typically found in the C suite of corporations and other large institutions, have mastered large impact strategic thinking. So, that is the skill they will bring to the challenge of growing an ecosystem. That skill can be very useful once there is a community to strategize about. Remember, you can't engineer or 5 year plan your way to success here. Startup communities are founder first. They're fueled by relationships, shared struggles, and authentic momentum. It's where people show up not because they're paid to, but because they care. And when you bring in institutional actors too early, before that foundation exists, you risk kind of building on sand. Corporate leaders might show up expecting a large number of mature startups and have a clear ROI. Government reps may ask for a 5 year strategic plan, or university folks might offer a curriculum that no one actually asked for. Without a vibrant community of founders to ground them, these efforts almost always miss the mark. Worse, they can unintentionally suffocate the community vibe with bureaucracy, control, or misaligned incentives. A room full of execs with no founders isn't an ecosystem. It's a board meeting with no product. What you need is a strong community before layering in those corporate execs and government bureaucrats and university leaders, because community is where the real entrepreneurial energy lives. And that energy can't be manufactured from a strategic plan. But when you start with community, when founders are connected, storytelling is strong, and local champions are leading, you create fertile ground for ecosystem actors to plug in meaningfully. Then corporate leaders can invest in something real. Government can amplify what's working, and universities can respond to actual needs. So, when should your city and its leaders focus on community building? The short answer is always. This is the foundation and the engine from which to build on, and the need never goes away. Remember this for later. If you've got fewer than, say, 25 full time startup founders in your city, you are likely in the nascent or developing phase of your journey. The goal here cannot be to build an ecosystem, it's way premature. Your goal at this juncture is to develop these 25 founders and offer new programs that open up the top of that funnel. Your focus is on connectivity, trust, creating good shared norms, i.e., your culture, and consistent contributions. This means more pizza nights, coffee meetups, storytelling, and mentorship. It means fewer 5 year strategic plans and more, let's get these 25 founders in a room and just listen. Once your city has a few hundred active entrepreneurs, you're probably in the emerging phase. And that's when ecosystem development starts to really make more sense. You've got some founder led momentum, and now you can look at layering in things like coordinating capital access, maybe developing talent development pipelines, or forging deeper university partnerships, or creating some government incentives that are very founder centric. But even then, you can't stop community building because it's not a linear path, it's more like a continual loop. And if your city is lucky enough to have, let's say, 1,000 active entrepreneurs, congrats. You're in that self sustaining phase. And that's when the ecosystem can truly start to function on its own, with founders at the center and institutions orbiting around them. A lot of well-intentioned leaders try to start with the ecosystem. And here's where things fall apart. They build that fancy innovation center, or they launch a $10 million investment fund, or they host a, insert the current hype technology word here, summit with slick branding and outside speakers. And there's this big hype engine and lots of ribbon cutting and maybe even a headline or two. And then nothing happens. In fact, we won't see that it did nothing for a couple of years. Why? Because there's no founders showing up. And if they do show up, it's only a handful. And those founders are typically not, frankly, best in class. I'll let you in on a little secret. There's no express train to the top of Everest and no way to shortcut the work required to build a community of great founders and then the subsequent layering in of the rest of the ecosystem. That is what I call the field of dreams fallacy. The idea that if you build the building, the entrepreneurs will naturally come. But real startup energy comes from the community, not from real estate. Another dynamic that shows up in the community versus ecosystem dynamic is what I refer to as the builders versus the power brokers. Startup community builders are often in the trenches. They're convening meetups, mentoring new founders, celebrating small wins. This is hand-to-hand combat and takes a lot of time, which nobody notices. They prioritize entrepreneurs' needs first and think in terms of small wins over long-term moonshots. Power brokers, on the other hand, often found in ecosystem roles, sometimes get caught up in the control mindset, trying to own the story, dictate the strategy, or measure success in the wrong ways, like capital deployed over companies helped. They are not the best in hand-to-hand combat and frequently do not have the patience to do all those little things. But here's the thing. Community building thrives in complexity, not control. It's like raising a child. You can't engineer every outcome, but you can create the environment for successful growth. And you can nurture, guide, and show up consistently. And now we come to the real core of this episode on what makes an ecosystem versus a community. Well, we start with founders. The founders set the pace of how fast you will grow. They always have, and they always will. You want to know how fast your community system is growing? Don't count buildings, count founders. How many are launching? How many are staying in your city instead of leaving? How many are mentoring others? How many are thinking bold, not incrementally? Because ultimately, the best startup communities are places where the number of founders is increasing and where founders feel seen, heard, and supported. Get that right, and the rest should naturally follow. So here's your takeaway. If your city is trying to build an ecosystem, but you don't yet have a thriving community of founders, hit the pause button. Go find those 25 founders in your city, ask them what they need, and then do that again and again. If you're already seeing some startup energy, great, keep going. Layer in the ecosystem components slowly, making sure the community always leads. And if you're a founder listening to this, let me remind you, you are the spark. Your courage to leap, your openness to mentor, your boldness to think bigger, that's what drives everything else. You don't need permission to lead, you just need to start. The rest of us, we'll follow your pace. So thanks for listening to your Startup Community Podcast. And until next time, connect, give first, and share some stories. Thanks for listening to this week's deep dive into the art and science of startup community building. If you like what you heard, subscribe, share, and maybe even shout it from your rooftop co-working space. You can also catch my weekly blog on the Techstars blog under POV. Until next time, keep showing up, build those connections, and as always, give first.